Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Jerry Mings, and I'm glad to be here with you today. We're going to be exploring the Facilitator's Workspace using Xmind 2003. Let me take you through the agenda to start with. Then we'll talk about using mind mapping to support your work as a facilitator. And then we'll play around a little bit with the case study. And then we'll wrap up with any questions you may have from today's session. So let me just start here. You're going to see me looking to my left. I've got a map over here for you, which you can see in your screen. And so one of the reasons I built this map in my practice was to create a single workspace. So when I'm working with a client or a group, I can collect all of my information in one place so we can have successful group events. And that's why we call it a single workspace, and that's why I wanted to share that with you today. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm located in Oakville, Ontario, Canada. I work as a facilitator and mediator. My training's in quality auditing, and I work in the health and social sector, and my journey in mind mapping started in my work as a facilitator, working through some of the challenges of documenting many things on the wall, but more importantly, getting prepared for a facilitation event in terms of capturing information, notes, ideas, documents from clients, so I could help co-design with them a facilitation event that would be helpful and meaningful for the group. The purpose of this entire work is really trying to also tie in three important things to me. One is the link with the client. The second thing is to competencies and ethics. I think what's really interesting about that is, as a member of International Association of Facilitators, there is a set of competencies and ethics that help guide my work and keep me moving forward. And it also helps me keep up with the clients, which I think is a really helpful piece of the story. So today we're going to have a chance to look at two maps. One is going to be the template, and the template will be posted and hosted by the team at Xmind, so you can take the template. I encourage you to work with the template. It's not perfect in terms you can't change anything. But really think about how could you work with your clients to support them when they're co-designing with you, so that things tend to work collectively right into the facilitation event and after the facilitation event. And then the last thing we'll take a look at is we'll take a look at a case study, which has some ways we can show you how you can modify it and change it. We'll come back to this map and we'll talk about lesson learns, and I'll deal with any questions you may have. We'll be about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and then we'll have some chance to dialogue and answer your questions that you may have. And I'll be checking in to see if any questions come up in the chat as we go through this. So let's take a moment and talk about this workspace. The facilitator's workspace is really divided into 5 areas. One is the client details, which is working with the client to figure out what they need. The other area is contracting, which is making a formal arrangement with the client to engage in the facilitation work. Then there's the actual facilitation engagement work that needs to take place. Finally, there's sometimes external resources that you need that impact the work of the group. The client will tell you what these are, but you need to figure out what they could be, where they are, why they're important. And then finally, some references that guide your work as a facilitator working through the process. Let's start with the client details. One of the things I think is really helpful when you're working with a client is to know something about their organization. Often you can do a search through the website You can talk to the client and get information from themselves, but you need a place where you can store information about the client that you can keep coming back to, and the client can see that you have this information and you're coming back to it. The other thing you really need to think about is the whole question of who are you contacting at the organization. Usually there's somebody that you're going to be responsible working with. They'll perform with you as part of the team. And then there also is the materials that the client has that often they want to share with you in order to make the adventure successful. A common one here is the annual report of the organization. Another one is any project plans that they believe will have an impact or are related to this work specifically. So that's something about the client details to think about. Let's talk about contracting. Contracting really requires the ability to listen and learn from the client. And client requirements often require a conversation in detail to really understand what they're hoping the group will achieve. So you need to listen to their requirements. You need to have a dialogue with them about the requirements. You need to think about how you're going to design the event or events. One of my experiences is that often it takes more events than planned. Some people want to do one facilitation event, when in fact it may take 2, 3, 4, 5 facilitation events. Then you have to figure out what you're doing before the facilitation, during the facilitation, and after the facilitation. And that's what I call the contracting. So everybody's clear about what's going to happen. You have dates related to what's important, and you can work through that. That's the contracting phase. Let me just move this over. Here we go. Then when we get to the external resources, sometimes you need external resources because they relate to things like what's going on in the broader structure of the organization. In healthcare, we talk about the healthcare system. We talk about how we're looking at healthcare collectively from a provincial or national level. Other organizations look at market standards, marketing trends, industry things that are important to them. So it's important to get clear about those sort of resources. We call them system information here, and we call it sector information. But the other thing is sometimes we look at legislation, law, regulations that the group and you need to know about. They're external to the actual group you're doing with, but they play a role in that. And that's the other piece to pay attention to. And finally, there's reference files. These are files that you want to pay attention to. And I mentioned one here, which is the IF competencies, the IF ethics, top focus conversation, and third-party references, such as Getting to the Bottom of the Top, which is a book, Facilitator's Guide to Participatory Decision-Making, which is a book, Liberating Structures, which has facilitation methods in it, and the Session Lab in the IF library. Now you notice here I've used part of this in building my template. I've created links that click out to the web, and we can see the work. So this is one of the first thing I want to share is you can actually click and be at the resource you need. You haven't had to look through any files or additional documents. You have it right there and you can work with it. So that's the overall template. And we call this a competency-based facilitator's workspace because everything you need is in one place to move forward. So I just want to check in there before I go to a case study. Are there any questions, or will we see any questions? Okay. Let's take some time and actually work within this case study file. And we'll see what this looks like. So this is a case study. It's a very generic case study. I tend to play with it so people can see how we could use this. And I'll fill in some blanks here, and we'll also do that. We're going to start on the left-hand side. Let's talk about the client details. And for this case study, I've made up a case where the client is an agency. They provide support services in the community. And in a very brief conversation with them, they told me the following information. One of the things they told me is they do personal support workers, which are people who provide supports in the home. It can be from preparing meals, helping people around the house, a variety of services. That's an important part in helping people remain in the community successfully. They're across the community, so they're in different homes, apartment buildings, townhouses, different things. They receive $50 million in revenue from the government each year to support this type of work as part of the system planning. They have 8-person senior team and 250 employees. They've been 10 years in existence, and they're growing by about 1.5 million a year. And my tip here is you can link all of those important documents here in one place using the linking function. And that it's very helpful to do that. For my facilitation work with this client, I'm going to be working with these 3 people. Susan, Brian, and Gerald, who make up part of the senior team. They're going to be a working group working with me as we work through the design of how to put together a good facilitation event, because what's becoming clear to me is they're trying to think about strategic planning. They've also given me permission to look at their annual report and their past strategic plan. And from that past strategic plan, it gives me a sense of when it was last done, the strategies that were involved, the rate of completion, where are they at with it, and any outstanding items. And again, using the template, you can add those files to this document through links, and you can also make notes within each topic so you have some quick reference of what's taking place. And you can see here, and it's going to be hard for you to see, I've made a note to myself, I want more information about the client. And that client details, that comes up early in the file. It may take a little while to sort out. But after that, I want to really meet with them to really understand what's going on. And in this stage, we spend time listening to the client. Now, this is where, in a competency-based framework, this becomes very helpful. I'm going to jump over here to external resources. There's this thing here called the Design Eye, and it's from the book, Getting to the Bottom of Top by Joe Nelson and Wayne Nelson. And it's a methodology of listening to the client. Now you'll notice I've taken that framework and I've used this over here in my template to listen to the client. So now we're listening to different things. So we're listening to brief description of what the agency is, and we can make notes here to the right about the organization, about the group, about the request that they're making. We can make our notes right here so we can see them. And in here, I have little prompts in the note file to tell me to make sure I ask these questions so that we're basically covering the required material. And then here, you can actually see where I've gotten into the organization, what they need, the concerns. We need a new plan. It's ongoing, but half of it's done and half of it's not done. The history, we make a lot of plans and they seldom complete plans. This is important information you're going to facilitate. Tells you that you may want to think carefully about how we help the group make sure they're going to get the work done they want to get done. Then you notice from that same analysis, we can talk about the group, and we find out there's 5 partner agencies that are involved with this agency. And the senior team and the staff of about 10 people need to be involved in this participatory work. And then we get to the request. This is what they're requesting: a new strategic plan. They want to be in sync with external requirements, so that tells me something about external resources we need to talk about. The board must be involved, and interestingly enough, they want to do this entire event virtually. So now we have a brief description of what they were really hoping to do, and we can co-design with them. Then we can move on and talk about change dynamics. So what are the key challenges? And I found out through about 5 minutes of that conversation, they're tired and they're struggling. The pandemic's been a real challenge. And even though we're past the pandemic stage, they're still experiencing some level of exhaustion and trying to move to a new normal. Where does a group struggle? They have lots of new ideas over and against too much to do in too little time. So great creativity, really challenging with terms of structuring their time and resources. And the image that they have of themselves is they like working together, and they're a great group of people. And the required breakthrough they need is, our current image is tired and we need new energy to cope. So they want to shift from always being behind to being on time and having lots of energy to move forward. And finally, I think in terms of the future, they're trying to work with some of these images here. We need to update our technology. They acknowledge that the clients need more services. Funding policies are challenging. They only got about 8 hours for this face-to-face. And the last point is they want to make sure they follow through. And that follow through really requires is changes in the organization, the organizational struggle. We mentioned they're tired before, the operating images, and connect strategic plan to daily accomplishments. So the plan's part of what everybody does and everybody experiences. So you can see with this particular part of the map, you can add documents, you can add links, you can add your notes. And what I usually suggest is if you can have your questions here in the note field, then you can put out the major points the group raises in the branch. That way they can see them as you're talking, and you know the key questions you need to include as you're moving through. So one of the things that happens after that stage is really taking a look at what are we going to do together? And this is really getting the basic game plan together in terms of what do we need to accomplish? We call this rational aims from that book. The specific results, they need those three things: a strategic plan, an operational plan, and a process to update the plan. And that's what the group's going to work on. The product is a strategic planning document, groups assigned to strategies in a year one plan. And the outcomes, staff engage and carry out the plans. And there you have, in essence, you can see in that map and always come back to it, what we're going to do as a group when working together, the facilitator and the group. Experiential aims, which talked about in that book, are very helpful. Really gets down to the fact of how will the group change? And this is some of the things that will, how the group will change over time, which is really helpful. And I'll put that there so you can see it. They connect with the vision. Each session builds teams, so they see themselves as a team. There's a framework for talking and working together is clear. They move from silos to team. They have a clear sense that we're making a difference and we can complete the whole plan. And that's something to really think about when you're thinking about what are we going to do together. And then there's the big shift, struggle to meaningful steps of success. So I think that's where I find this really helpful in terms of having a framework to listen. How do we build a plan that we can complete in success? So that's a lot of data we gathered using a framework from an external source in our map, and it's all there in one place that we can see it, along with the outstanding contradiction. We are working hard, yet not working together, and the doorway to the future is we can make a clear single step of progress and balance our work. So that's how you can use a map when you're building facilitation events to really have a cohesive set of questions and answers that really help the group work together. Then you can build out a design, which is what are we going to do ahead of time? Since this is going to be virtual, pick a software, get the list of participants, identify the time frame. Then you can do the facilitation engagement and the post-facilitation engagement. I think the last thing that's really important when you're contracting is really contract. Be clear about what's confidential for the group, what's confidential for you as a facilitator. That's a non-disclosure agreement. Be clear about how you're going to work together, and then create a statement of work of what that statement of work looks like. So that's the phase of contracting that I think is really helpful when you're working with a group and working together. I'm going to come over here for a second. I want to show you one thing here. The left-hand side of this diagram really dealt with the facilitator and the group, because that's what's really important. The right-hand side here deals with external resources and the competencies that help you as a facilitator working with a group. So the first thing I want to show is external resources. As I mentioned earlier, since I know this group is doing healthcare in the community, they're relating to people, I may want to pay attention to some policy documents. So I'm in the province of Ontario. There's Ontario Ministry of Health. I can link to external documents and regulations and in legislation. When I know how they're providing healthcare in the province, a big piece of this is Ontario Health Teams. I can link to maybe their closest Ontario Health Team. And the last thing is I can link to things like CARF accreditation standards. CARF is a body that does accreditation for agencies to help them continually improve their services with standards and on-site assessment. Sometimes what I find helpful is they have a standard that tells people what's required in a strategic plan. So that information will inform my work around the engagement and the design. And the last piece I want to share here is sometimes when you're working through a file, and this is the piece that's for you as a person facilitating, you're going to run into some really interesting questions. One of those questions may be about competencies. And what's helpful is in this map, I have put in place the IF competencies to remind me. So did I work collaboratively with the client? I think so on this design. We co-designed. Have I picked the appropriate methodology to facilitate the event and work with the group? How did I create and sustain participation? And how did I facilitate, enable them to arrive at an appropriate and useful outcome? And how will this material help me with my professional development and my professional attitude? And you'll notice here in the map, I've included the actual details for each one of these from the competencies. And this gives me clues of what my behavior should look like. So this is really helpful when you're really thinking about your design of facilitation. You got the collaborative client relationships, plan appropriate group process, create and sustain a participatory environment, and guide the group. Guide the group. And these are your professional development areas. And I find it's helpful to have this just as a good reminder that when I'm designing, when I'm listening, designing, and facilitating, I follow those competencies. So it gives me a big roadmap to work with. The other area is ethics. There's a certain amount of ethics we work with, and sometimes you run into problems where you're going to run into a challenge. Let me put one in here for you as an example. This is when a group asks for another group's report. That's a bit of an ethical challenge. Hey, Jerry, we know you facilitated the strategic plan for the people down the street. Can you send us a copy of it? Well, if I look at the conflict of interest and I look at confidentiality, really there's some clues here that say to me, that's not really an appropriate thing to do. Now I've identified what the conflict is, I can then come up with a meaningful solution. Contact the agency. In other words, I took myself out of the conflict and gave them the choice. If they want the plan from the other agency, you might want to contact them and talk to them. They may be interested in sharing it with you or sharing what they learned, and that's probably an appropriate way to move forward. For every conflict, you're going to run into a dilemma, and you'll have some solutions you can create. I just shared the one with you I did use so that you can move forward as a group. So that's where ethics come into play, and they're very, very helpful when you're working through a file and you may run into some challenges. Third-party references, I've mentioned this book, which I find very helpful, and I've used it as part of this map. That's why I want to acknowledge it. This is a book about decision-making. And then there's also, if you're struggling to find a method, you're saying, I need to do something with this group and I'm not sure what I can do, you can actually click on the link and it will take you to the IF methodology library, and there's a lot of resources in there. And Liberating Structures also has a whole another set of resources that are really, really helpful. So that's just an example of using the map, working it through. You could add your own branches here to reference materials. You can customize your external resources that you want. You can use the front part of this map to build your story with the clients, work through the contracting, and finish up your facilitation engagement activities. So I've had a chance to take you through the template. I've had a chance to sort of walk through a case study so you could hear some things. People often ask me, what's the lessons I've learned from doing this? The first thing is using a mind map to create one spot for your work can save you a tremendous amount of time instead of having to look for different files, different types of files, because you can link to the mind map Word files, Google Doc files, spreadsheets, PowerPoints, PDF files, and they're all in one place. Number two, you can export from Mind this program. You can export Word files and different types of formats. So you have maybe parts of this map that you want to export and use in another document. This is a dynamic map, which means that as you go through time and work with this file is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So you're going to be constantly reorganizing material and you'll see everything develop. The advantage of that is when you're working with a client, they come along with you so they can see all their work evolving in one place. It gives you a great opportunity to explore learning opportunities for change. You can think differently about the work you're doing and why you're doing it. And I think the other thing is you'll find your practice will grow. When you get into a framework where you're using a standard map template to really deal with the dynamic nature of work, you can figure out patterns after a while where you're learning, where you're seeing something, where something looks different than you've seen before. So I want to stop there and say thank you. I'm curious about any questions you may have. I'm just going to go up here into the chat and see if I can see anything. I don't see any questions. So those are my comments. I hope they've been helpful for you. And we're right on the 30 minutes past the hour. I'll go back to the host of our call. Is there anything that I need to add or address for people? If not, I want to say thank you for joining us today for this Xmind webinar. And we've had a chance to talk to Facilitators Workspace. and I'm wishing you the very best for the day.